everyone. Today we're going to talk about the self-soul-spirit model, which was founded by Dr. Roger Strachan, who's my mentor, and he's been a lifelong therapist and psychologist. He's been working with people for over 60 years. And the self-soul-spirit model is a way of understanding who you are and how you want to work with those facts about who you are. So the self-soul-spirit model enables us to live a more meaningful life because it increases our choices. Now, one of the primary components of understanding the self-soul-spirit model is understanding subpersonalities. Now, what are subpersonalities? And how come we would even talk about subpersonalities? Well, subpersonalities are parts of who we are as human beings. See, what we have to understand is that throughout this long period of evolution that the human species has gone through is that we've had to develop multiple ways of interacting and multiple modes of relating to the world and to each other. The more complex an organism becomes, the more parts it has, the more components it can relate from. And so a subpersonality is really a mode of being that allows a specific way of interacting to occur. So subpersonalities are natural to being human. They're natural to the complexity of who we are. Let's go to the slides here. So there are ways of seeing and perceiving. So you might imagine that as you go through your day-to-day life, multiple modes of being and interacting shift in and out of your first-person conscious perspective. And as those shifts take place, you might imagine that different subpersonalities are coming into the fore. Modes of interacting, as I've said, so just different modes of relating to yourself, relating to others, and relating to the world. Ways of behaving, right? It's not just how we feel or how we interpret or how we perceive, but a subpersonality is also intrinsic to how we behave, so that a part of us could voice a thought or take an action and in different contexts and to different degrees of intensity. Now, there's a little distinction here to be aware of. Sometimes you could think of a subpersonality as a fully or more or less independent part of the psyche. But other times we use the word parts. So you might hear me say part, a part of you. I'm using that in a synonymous manner to subpersonalities. They both have a different emphasis though. When you use the word part, you're emphasizing the wholeness of which it is a part. When you use the word subpersonality, we tend to emphasize the independence or the semi-autonomy of that part. So just be aware as I go in and out of using those terms. They're synonymous, they just have a different emphasis. Now, wholeness is something that we're going to talk about throughout this presentation. But for now, it's sufficient to say that the idea of a part or a subpersonality implies a wholeness of which it adheres to. So to be a part of the psyche means that you are a part of the greater person, a part of the greater network of the human being that is Ryan or is Eric and so forth. So this whole idea of subpersonalities always is housed within the idea of a whole human being. So we have to keep that holistic approach in mind as we discover the parts of who we are. And it's also important to remember that these are characters with their own perspective, their own aims, their own thoughts, their own behavioral preferences. They really do animate our consciousness in ways that are just magnificent to observe. And it doesn't take a whole lot of observation or self-inquiry to figure this out. If you watch yourself behave and the way that you feel and the way that you think throughout your day, you might just notice the fluctuations in your perspective. That when you are a father, it feels a little bit different than when you are a teacher, or when you are a lover, or when you are an adventurer. And that the difference in feeling isn't just a matter of different masks that you put on, but is often actually a matter of different values that inhabit your psyche, different persons inside of you, if you'll allow that term. Now, one of the best ways to understand subpersonalities is through what Dr. Strachan and others call post hoc rationalizations. And this is based on the idea that we do what we want to do at any given moment, and then we make up a story about why we did it. And he says that humans are the only species that make up stories about our actions. All other animals just do what they want to do, offering no explanations. Now, aside from the fact that other animals can't speak, the point that he's really making there is that human beings tend to feel the need to come up with justifications. Animals are more or less unified with their present moment behavior. There's not a whole lot of analysis or a whole lot of questioning or rationalizing going on. They do what they want to do. For some reason, with us human beings and our complex brains, we feel the need that we have to explain ourselves. We have to come up with a story. Now, the interesting thing is that the story typically doesn't have to do with the actual reason for why we do something, right? So we make up a story, but that story doesn't necessarily comport with the reason that we do it. So for example, if you have a subpersonality that loves snow skiing, sometimes human beings find themselves tempted to say, well, I love snow skiing because, I was raised in a culture that valued it and my family taught me how to snow ski and so forth. But no, in the self-soul spirit model, we just say it is what it is. You love it because there's a part of you that loves it. So it really simplifies our behavior to the extent that we don't need whys so much as we need what's and who's. Who inside of me values this? The whys are kind of a cultural trap that we fall into to explain behavior. So that's a good way to understand subpersonalities. Now, there's a difference between parts and roles. Parts or subpersonalities are intrinsic to who you are. Roles are something that you do. Okay, so I could learn how to be a waiter. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have a part of me that is a waiter. That's a social role that I've taken up, that I've learned how to do. Now, I might have parts of me that are capable of learning how to be a waiter, and then they play the role of being a waiter, but that's different. Now let's take the example of parenting. Some people come into the world and they feel that a part of them is a very strong natural mother or natural father. Now that's not a role because it's something that they deeply care about, that they want to do, that is beyond just serving a function in a particular context. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is one of the best ways to understand the difference between a subpersonality and a role is, can you extrapolate the attitude and apply it among different contexts? So if you have a natural father, it's very likely that that father is going to show up with your kids, maybe sometimes at work or with friends, that father might have a variety of opinions about life and want to interact with life in many different ways. And maybe that having children is the most valuable part of that valuable aspect of that part of you's life. But the point is that a subpersonality is not dependent on a single context. Roles typically are dependent on a single context. So a subpersonality is an attitudinal position that is somewhat flexible. Now, that doesn't mean that subpersonalities don't have preferences. They do. They might prefer some activities over others. Let's keep. Now, one of the most important things about this model is understanding the nature, nurture, origins of subpersonalities. This has to go back to genetics and brain development. We are not a blank slate, okay? So the old philosophical tradition of empiricism, which started with David Hume and then up into John Locke's idea of the tabula rasa, it held that you come into the world and your brain is an empty slate and life experience makes you who you are. Simply not the case, as we now know from a variety of evidence coming out of fields like neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, behavioral genetics. We come into the world with specific predispositions, and those predispositions are unique to our own genetic constitution, and no two human beings are exactly alike. So everybody has unique predispositions. Those predispositions get wired through your genes to your brain and your body, through the protein mechanisms, and eventually there's a very complex road that leads up to your personality expression. Now, we say nature and nurture, not nature or nurture. The whole idea that there was ever a divide between the two was completely contrived. It doesn't actually exist. Nature comes with the package of life. Life experience comes with the package of nature. There is no dichotomy. So, of course, our experiences matter. Of course, who we are around and the culture that we are within matters to how we express ourselves. It's how we express ourselves within that context is where those predispositions come in. So when we look at personality science and dispositional tendencies, we can confidently say that when you come into the world as a unique human being, you're not just going to interact with your environment in any way, but that the environment will solicit specific responses from you because of your unique constitution, and you will solicit specific responses from others because of their unique constitution. What does that mean for us and for subpersonalities? What it basically means is that subpersonalities interact with the world based on their unique and specific constitution. Because remember, because of the complexity of human evolution, we haven't just had to evolve one trait. We've had to evolve multiple mechanisms for behavior over a very long period of time. Okay, so we have to be able to specify behavior through complex circuitry and modularity in the body, which allows us to inhabit different subpersonalities, so that these predispositions are more than just a single entity with a preference, but they're more like many different clusters of genes that interact with our complexity to bring out expressions, okay? Now, this is just an important scientific point. Genetic contributions to personality differences are polygenic, not monogenic. Okay, there's multiple genes involved, sometimes hundreds or thousands, that contribute to a personality trait. They're also, as Robert Plowman points out, a preeminent behavioral geneticist, they're also pleiotropic. Pleiotropic means one gene might impact a variety of traits. So they're polygenic and they're pleiotropic, and genes are probabilistic, not deterministic. There is no way to pre-state the outcome of a genetic predisposition. It has to be expressed contextually within an environment that we cannot fully predict. We don't have all the variables. There is no way to determine it. There's too much what they would call randomness, but that just really means we don't understand it fully. But what we do know is that that probabilistic interaction with the environment is based on tendencies and preferences and modes of interacting that come naturally to a human being, and they're given subpersonalities. Now, Dr. Strachan says everything is attraction and connection. So if you come into the world with a strong athletic predisposition and you get the chance to go on that basketball court, you might just fall in love with basketball and never look back because you have the predisposition, because you have the athletic subpersonality. That subpersonality develops and enhances its neural pathways through neuroplasticity and continues to strengthen its proclivities over time. The same thing applies to, let's say you have the predisposition for alcoholism. Well, if you don't drink, you won't get drunk. If you don't get drunk, you won't become an alcoholic. So remember, probabilistic, not deterministic. Now, let's move on a little bit here. This is from a theoretical physicist, Michio Kaku. Some of you might know him. He's written several bestsellers. Quote, mentally, we feel that our mind is a single entity, continuously and smoothly processing information, totally in charge of our decisions. But the picture emerging from brain scans is quite different from the perception we have of our own mind. Now, what is that picture? Well, it basically shows that our consciousness and the way that we experience it and the way that it correlates with the brain is multitudinous, and there are many different parts of the psyche, and then we construct a narrative that says I'm a single person, I'm a single unit, I'm a single I after the fact. But that is a mere construction. It doesn't actually occur within the brain and within the consciousness. So that multiplicity and subpersonalities, the way that I interpret this quote in the context in which he wrote it, is that we are always multiple psychic persons that then after the fact get consolidated into a single voice through our reasoning, through our post hoc rationalizations. Now, this is from an evolutionary psychologist, Marco Del Gaiadis. If one considers the fact that the mind contains a multiplicity of motivational and self-regulatory systems, and that each system may accommodate several dimensions of variation, it becomes apparent that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of personality traits potentially worthy of description. Remember, this comes back to the evolutionary basis of who we are and how that's continued to be elaborated upon in evolutionary psychology. There are multiple traits that all have the capacity to have different perspectives or different behavioral mechanisms that contribute to our human nature. Now, let's talk a little bit about the lived experience of subpersonality. So far, I've been scientific. Now, let's be a little bit phenomenological, because this is where it really makes sense to people. This is where people feel like they can connect with it in their own way because they can see it in their own life. So, you've all heard this. A part of me feels like I want to break up with this person, but another part of me feels really like staying with them and seeing where it goes. We always speak from these different parts of us, and we just don't necessarily become aware of it metacognitively. We don't necessarily acknowledge it, but they're always voicing their opinion. And sometimes in our colloquial speech, we exhibit that fact, like when people say, a part of me feels. Now, in the next slide, as we'll see here, there's another way of looking at this. Some people will say they might lose their temper, or they might do something that doesn't seem like the behavior that they normally try to control, and they'll say, I don't know what got into me. I don't know how that happened, right? And what they're really saying is some other part of me took over, right? But because we like excuses and acting confused and we don't know what's going on, we say, I don't know what happened. It is a very convenient way of saying, well, some other part of me did that, and I'm not sure if I like it as the part of me that's speaking right now. And this comes to my next point, which is that multiplicity in the psyche isn't necessarily exciting to everyone. Some people hear what I'm saying and they say, gosh, that's a lot of work to understand these different parts of who we are. And it is a lot of work. The work that we do to understand it and then direct it is what's beneficial. Hard work brings benefits, in my estimation. And this model allows us to take responsibility for our complexity without necessarily having to hide behind excuses or convenient ways of speaking that ultimately aren't authentic. Sometimes people will say about other people's behavior, well, they weren't in their right mind. Well, what they really mean is that some other part of them did something I didn't like. Now, this is a great story. So Dr. Strachan, as I said, he's been doing this for over 60 years. He's now 88 years old. But when he was younger, there was the possibility of him getting drafted into the war. I believe it was World War II, if I'm not mistaken. And so he goes into one of the government rooms that they're handling this. I forget what it's called. And the guy behind the desk says, well, how can I help you? He says, well, I haven't been drafted yet, but I got to tell you, if I do, put me up in one of those planes, because I'd much rather be bombing other people than having bombs dropped on my head. And he says, well, if I'm not drafted, then I'm going to be a therapist and help people live transformational lives and help them heal. And the guy sitting behind the counter goes, really? Both of those people live inside of you? And he says, yes. And that was Dr. Strachan's warrior and his facilitator/therapist. That is the amazing thing about the personality. We can have two parts that see the world completely differently. One could go for a fight and get really gritty and violent, and the other wants to help people heal and grow and become. That's the amazing thing. And in our model, we don't shame that. We don't say it's wrong. We say it is what it is. That's what it is to be human. There's many different perspectives. It's what we do with that fact that matters. So what we can say now is that subpersonalities are a variety. They express themselves as a variety of ways of interacting within the same person, and that they are brought out in different contexts. So if you watch your behavior as you go through your life, as you go through your day, you might just see that. You might just become aware, wow, this is different than this is a different part of me. Or you might have a conflict where two different parts are trying to speak at the same time. And that will also be an opportunity for awareness. Now, this will be interesting to see. Mike Tyson has a fighter subpersonality. And again, this is my conjecture. I don't know Mike, but from my point of view, I am speculating that we can say he has a fighter subpersonality. Let's watch the clip.
I always cry before I fight.
You did? Always cry before
Yeah.
you fight? What were you crying about?
I don't know. That's just who I am.
Yeah, but go further. What's the emotion? Are you?
I'm getting ready to change into somebody I don't like.
You're getting ready to change. You change into the fighter,
Yeah.
and you don't like that fighter.
Not really. No, not really.
Wow, Mike Tyson, that's illuminating. You are the greatest fighter that ever lived, and you didn't like that guy.
No, because he came more with fighting.
He what?
He brought more than just fighting with him.
What do you mean?
He brought like jealousy, enviness, guilt. He brought a lot of stuff.
All the bad qualities
Yeah.
that you learned were bad,
Yeah.
you assigned to that Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
That isn't the Mike Tyson I'm talking
No,
to.
no, not at all.
Isn't that incredible that we can watch him struggle with this other part of him? Now, here's the interesting part. The part of him that's talking is also a part of him, right? So don't forget that just because we're accentuating the fighter subpersonality, that the parts of him that are talking, let's just say it's a lover for convenience sake. The lover is saying, well, I don't want to be the fighter. The fighter is a jerk, and he's resentful, and he's angry, and he's jealous, and he's I don't want any of that stuff. But I could almost guarantee that when he's in the fighter says, why would I be the lover? I'd rather kick some ass and be pissed off and whatever. So that's the diversity of the personality, that you can see the struggle that some people even have with the diversity of their own personality. And that is what it is to be humans. I think we all know this deep down in our gut. We are complex. If we were just a single voice with one perspective, life would be easy because we wouldn't have to think about anything. But because we have complexity, we're always faced with our multiplicity, and we always have to come to grips with it in one way or another, whether we explicitly acknowledge it or not. We have to make a choice. There are decisions. There are parts of us that take control versus others. That's life. Now we're just doing the service to ourselves of making that. We're honoring it. We're bringing it to the front of our experience. We're making it as explicit as possible so that we can have more meaningful insights into our experience and more meaningful choices. So how do we notice subpersonalities? Well, you just had an example there with Tyson. You could definitely see the subpersonalities. That was an obvious one. But here's how you might notice them within yourselves. Notice internal tensions. You know, all of us in one way or another throughout our weeks, throughout our months, throughout our days, we have experience of inner conflict. That's an easy way to be like, there must be two parts of me or more struggling for energy right now, because that's what a conflict is. So, you know, I often use the example of, well, maybe the alcoholic wants to go drinking, but the lover still wants to quit drinking because it's affecting the relationship with the wife or the husband and so forth. Those are the types of things. That's an extreme example, but there's more subtle ways that we do this. For example, one part of me wants to go on this diet and really get lean, and the other part of me wants to enjoy my food and eat as much as I want and eat whenever I want, right? So diversity of views, perspectives, and behaviors, the way that we express ourselves. Here's another example. One part wants to get homework done while the other wants to watch TV. Those of you who have kids or have been through school yourself might be able to relate to that one in one way or another. One part wants to be pissed off and angry while the other wants to be harmonious. Well, that's exactly what we saw with Tyson just a moment ago. Shifting states of being. Again, when you're in one state and you shift into another, can you pay attention to your experience and understand that and feel that? How will you know it's a subpersonality? Well, it has a distinct feeling tone. If you pay attention to your experience and the way the sensations and emotions and thoughts are presenting themselves, you're going to notice the differences. Different attitudes, different memories, different associative networks in the brain that conjure up different modes of consciousness. It will become evident if you pay attention. Do a reflection exercise momentarily. Get comfortable, relax your shoulders, release any tension, close your eyes if you want to. Take a couple deep breaths. I just noticed I have a part of me that's a compulsive driving force. I call him the compulsive addict or the compulsive driver. I just noticed he's driving hard right now during this presentation. I can feel the intensity. I can feel the energy. I can feel the grip it has on my psyche. I just noticed that intensity. What I want you to notice is, what are you experiencing right now? In your body, in your thoughts? Are you daydreaming about something later? Are you thinking about something I'm saying? Are you evaluating, judging, celebrating? And just be aware, maybe there's a part of you having an experience right now. Maybe there's a part of you that's present and alive and in the driver's seat of your conscious experience. Just be mindful to that. Be aware of that possibility. Or maybe there's two parts that are hanging out together. Just notice the energy and the feeling of that. The great thing about this exercise is there's no wrong way to do it. No matter what you're noticing something that says something about who you are and a particular part of who you are. So whether it's annoyance or pleasure, it doesn't matter. It's just saying something about you, about who you are and how you feel. So let's go to the next slide. Join me as slowly as you need to. I'm just going to ease us into the next slide. What I want you to bring your attention to is the graphic that I've put together. What is it saying? It's saying that subpersonalities come in and out of first-person experience, what we call I. Well, who is I? Well, that depends. Who's talking right now inside of me? What part of my psyche has taken control of experience, or what parts? Now, as we engage with the world, as you can see in that gray aspect, different parts will naturally want to be involved and jump in. Also, as we just experience the internal shifts of what it is to be human, parts naturally fluctuate. A perfect example of that is dreams. When we dream, multiple parts of us are throwing up images in our brain, and there's all sorts of activity going on. Well, that's many parts interacting in the dream. Now, when one part comes in and takes control of consciousness, I'm calling that in this graphic the eye-shifting portal. Now, it's important to say there's no such thing as an eye-shifting portal, literally. It's an analogy for the sense of something shifts where one part of the psyche comes into the driver's seat and the other parts are in the back seat, or they're not anywhere in the visible stream of our consciousness at the moment. That is something that occurs. That is something I'm encouraging people to pay attention to. Now, this next graphic here is only meant to show that it's not linear. It's not like there's a design or a plan that we can linearly map out and say, well, subpersonality A got in line and then subpersonality B took its turn. No, they could jump in and say something anytime they decide, depending on context, depending on all the variables that we can't possibly track. It's not sequential. There's just variability in how the subpersonalities come in and out. Some of us might have had an experience, gosh, I was so happy, and then all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden I was feeling grumpy and I really don't know how that came over me. Well, another part got into the consciousness. That's how it happened. Now, a big part of this model is the soul. Now, what is the soul? The soul is the whole that transcends the sum of its parts. What do I mean by that? We are, as human beings, a total organism, a total embodied psyche. So you can't reduce yourself down to a part or just a collection of parts. There is something essential about you that makes you unique, that is deeper than the parts of you that are interacting at any given moment. That's the soul. That's your essence. That's your life energy. Carl Jung called it the anima. Okay, and that is also derived from Aristotle. The anima is the soul, the life principle. And Aristotle believed that with life comes soul, comes animation, comes essence, comes life force. And that's what we believe in self, soul, spirit. The soul is the life force. The soul is the energy of who you are. And I'd like to invite you all to just vigorously rub your hands together. Just really go after it for a moment. And just feel the energy. The human body is a tremendous source of energy that we have access to. See if you can feel the energy of that. and see if you can get into your body, into your core, and feel what it might be like to be in your soul, to be in your essence, to be in your life force. I feel it most strongly deep in my core, and then it permeates through my whole body. I've had to practice sensing this and feeling it for years for it to get stronger and stronger. And now I can really access it on command. That's soul, okay? Soul is the deep essence of who you are. Now, many people will say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't feel my soul. That's okay. Sometimes it takes what it takes to break through that initial wall and get into that deeper feeling of the soul. It's not always immediately accessible. And that's one of the things we work on in our Living in the Gap programs, is that we want people to come into contact with their souls. So we offer tools, and it's not something fantastical or far fetched. You don't have to transport yourself to some metaphysical dimension to find your soul. It's right here. You got access to it in your experience. It's just the energy of who you are, and it can't just be reduced. You are a whole, you are an essence. That's the soul. The depth of your being. Again, it comes with a felt sense of radiance and energy. Now, being in the soul is a feeling which can come with an unmistakable knowing that one is in their soul. That's a great way to know if you're in your soul. You'll just know it deep in your bones. It's not one of those things that, well, I think I'm in my soul. You just kind of deeply know it. Now, what's the difference between a self-directed life and a soul-directed life? Well, in a self-directed life, what happens? The parts of the person, the genetic predispositions and the way they've developed through environmental experiences, they just do what they want to do. They take their own form, they interact with life, and the strong ones that have dominance dominate, and the ones that aren't quite as nurtured or strong kind of sit in the background, and maybe they get their turn every once in a while. But that's just life as it happens. It's just the parts doing what they do. And sometimes people live their whole life that way, and it's relatively okay. There's no definite issue with that. But the thing is that the soul is what brings in meaning and purpose. And it's also worth mentioning that sometimes people run their life from just their parts, and it becomes a disaster. You know, for example, a part of them might be an alcoholic, or a part of them might be suicidal, and that takes control and leads down a road that maybe the other parts of them or the soul didn't want, but that they didn't feel strong enough to take control. They didn't access a deeper level of consciousness and interaction that could challenge that position. So it is important to be aware that sometimes the soul can be life-saving. It was for me, because I'm someone who struggled with addiction. I have a strong addict in my personality, okay? And that addict is not good or bad. It just is what it is. But because the addict expressed himself in certain ways when I was younger, through drugs and alcohol and seeking conflict and so forth, it became an issue for the rest of the parts of me. And finally, because I was acquainted with this type of work, I was able to redirect that energy. But I didn't put my addict in a bag. I didn't try to hide him away somewhere so he couldn't be seen. I didn't try to heal him of his illness. No, I said, well, I've got an addict. And what that means is that anything worth doing is worth overdoing for me. So what am I going to do with it? Well, I'm going to get sober and practice meditation. I'm going to read the books I like. I'm going to be athletic and feed the athlete subpersonality. I'm going to feed my lover. I'm going to go get my PhD. On and on and on. These are things that I was able to direct my addict to do in a meaningful sense. And we call that repurposing, as you'll see here momentarily in a few minutes. Now, here's my mandala. See my soul in the middle? And those are all the parts of Ryan that are naturally parts of. They're not roles, they're natural parts of who I am. So the shaman likes to feel into energy and is intuitive, as I just explained the exercise of the soul and feeling energy. He loves that. The teacher is the one who you're mostly talking to today, along with the philosopher. We love ideas. We love teaching meaningful living. We love teaching the soul spirit, self-soul spirit model. My facilitator, he's the therapist in me who works with clients. My caregiver who wants people to be happy. He can be more of a pleaser, whereas my challenger, he's more confrontational. He's more assertive. He couldn't really give a damn about pleasing. He's more about establishing his perspective, and whether it's a debate or standing up for somebody. And I had to work on getting the challenger to be an ally rather than somebody who's a pain in the soul's ass, because the challenger used to overreact. So My father is very familiar with my challenger. We would have all sorts of interesting conflicts where my challenger would bring 10 pounds to a 1 pound argument, as Dr. Strachan would say. And what that means is, well, Ryan, do you want a cup of coffee? What do you mean, do I want a cup of coffee? Stuff like that. Or, different things where he would just bring a lot of energy to a situation that didn't necessarily need it. So I've had to work as the soul over many years with getting my anger under control and making my challenger an ally rather than a detriment to who I am. And he's doing a great job. Now, as the challenger, I can speak directly to you. I love life. I love standing up for people. If I need to bring in intensity, I do. And I try to work on making sure it's appropriate to the moment that the soul sees rather than just taking a position. Because I like to be pissed off. I like having something to be angry about as the challenger. And that doesn't always work for the other parts of me. Now, the only part of me that doesn't want to work with the soul, well, there's, mostly it's the black hole, sometimes the analyzer. He'd rather analyze the heck out of everything than be soul directed. The black hole is the predisposition I brought in genetically for depression and self-shaming and self-criticism. So I find all sorts of ways to work with that so that I don't have to go there. So the other parts of me find ways to deal with the black hole when he tries to run my life into the ground and sabotage my life. And it works wonderfully. He has very little control over me today. And there was a point in my life where he had a lot of control over me. He could create 2-week-long depressions or keep me down and out for extended periods of time and sabotaging relationships and sabotaging myself. That doesn't happen anymore because I stop it. And now I laugh at him. And every once in a while he does something that he gets away with something. I say, gosh, you got me there. But it's way less than ever before. Very rarely does he get the type of control he wants. So that's pretty amazing. And for my clients who have dealt with depression, it's been transformational for them to understand that there is a part of them that gets depressed. It's not all of who they are. What do you want to do with that fact? How do you want to work with that part of you? You might even see if that part of you wants to be repurposed. My black hole doesn't want to be repurposed because it's just too strong of a genetic proclivity for misery, unfortunately. But I'm happy because the other parts of me figured out how to circumvent it. Now, this is Dr. Strachan's mandala. He's also chosen animals that correspond with the parts of who he is that he feels are intuitively aligned. It's just another example for you as you consider what this might look like for yourself. If you come to our programs, you are going to do your own mandala. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that today, but you'll be able to contact us or sign up for one of our programs for more information. And you can always take a stab at it on your own. Now, mandalas, that's what we call them. Mandalas are patterns of wholeness. Carl Jung took it upon himself to study these extensively in his day, and he really thought they were symbolic of the total self. When I say soul, he says self as well, capital S, the whole self, and that they were patterns of wholeness that represented the unification of the complexity of the personality in a meaningful way. And so you can see the intricacies of the mandala there with the different figures, the human figures and the different patterns. And you might consider that could represent the different subpersonalities of who somebody is. Now, Carl Jung would call them archetypes. What we do in Self, Soul, Spirit is because we now have the scientific validation that there are no two humans alike, we don't go with universal archetypes so much as we go with unique genetic expressions and predispositions and so forth. Now, you might have seen this one in church, for those of you who go to church. Mandalas are not just an Eastern tapestry. They come with many different cultures. This one, of course, this is very symbolic because Christ, the self, the whole self, the higher self, whatever you want to call it, he's in the middle of the mandala, and there's all the patterning around him. So mandalas are universal symbols that Carl Jung thought were very significant. So Dr. Strachan took from that and he borrowed it and said, well, let's accommodate that to fit the self, soul, spirit model in the parts of who we are. And that's the brilliance of the mandala, is it's a wholeness. It's your own self-contained wholeness as a unique human being. It is you. It's an amazing tool that we use with our clients and our students. Now, spirit is another very important part of the model, and I'm going to breeze through it quite quickly because we're running out of time and I have some very important slides. But let me just note, if you want to learn more about the spirit part of the model, you will come to our intensives, or you can seek out videos that Dr. Strachan and I have done on spirit. So this is a quote from a paper that we wrote a year or two ago. In modernity, many people are now open to novel understandings of spirituality, which require no intermediary or authority, but are blessed on the basis of powerful first-hand experience in which spiritual connection is fostered. Well, what does that mean? Well, that just basically means in the self soul spirit model, we acknowledge each person's right to come to their own form of spiritual connection with the universe. And the soul is the connection to the universe. Now, spiritual is up for grabs in terms of what that means. We don't have any definite proclamations of truth in self soul spirit, but we acknowledge that throughout human history, finding spiritual meaning has been a very important aspect of many people's lives, and therefore an important aspect of their psychological development. And so many of us might even bring in a spiritual seeker genetically that really wants to find a connection with the universe. And especially for those people, we suggest really enhancing that connection and following it to where it goes. Other people might be more oriented towards living in the mundane. They also might have some curiosity about spirituality, and they might want to see, well, what does it mean to be a human being in the universe? And we leave that wide open. That's the beauty of the model. We let it be an individualized process of spiritual meaning. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some things here. This quote just basically acknowledges that the self-soul spirit model is designed that the soul delivers a life well lived to the spirit. So at the end of your life, you have directed your parts in a meaningful way. And as you leave this body, wherever we might go, whether we cease to exist or whether we go into the universe in another form of consciousness, that we have delivered a life well lived to spirit. Now that's an amazing thing, that the universe now gets to collect our life, and we know deep down that it's been a life well intended, and that we've directed the parts of us in ways that we saw fit as souls. Now let's talk about principles of the self-soul spirit model. This is a big one. It's a simple aphorism and very profound. It is what it is. It's what you do with it that counts, and it takes what it takes. It is what it is. You are who you are. The parts of you are who they are. It's what your soul decides to do with it that counts. And sometimes it just takes what it takes to change something or to realign something or to redesign something. It just takes what it takes. Sometimes it takes a lot. I can tell you, for me to get to where I am today with my black hole, it's taken a heck of a lot of work. A lot of work. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And the benefits, the proof is in the pudding. It's in my lived experience. So soul-directed living is also about authenticity. What is it that the soul really wants to express? Are we being authentic to that? Are we being authentic to the parts of who we are in a way that fits the soul's purpose? Or are we judging or shaming or hiding who we are based out of fear or based out of control or based out of any number of coping mechanisms we've designed? So, the soul can also, as I've mentioned, repurpose parts of the self. I'm going to find this example absolutely astounding. Michael Jordan, I speculate, has a competitive subpersonality. Well, you think? I definitely think he has a competitive subpersonality. Let's watch and see what he's done with it after his career.
Part of my struggles after the game is my competitive drive. You know, I was such a competitive player, and each and every day felt the need to always get ahead of my opponent. Well, when you're out of sports and you're in, in normal life, you don't shed that armor that you actually have coated yourself with, based on your lifestyle and that work ethic. It's just, you have to find your way around it, and that's frustrating, and sometimes that's even tough, because of the competitive nature that I have. I look at everything from a competitive nature, and I tell my wife all the time is that I'm cursed. I'm cursed from a competitive standpoint that, I cannot watch or compete or be a part of things without competition, and that's something that I live with today, but I would not want to live without, because I think it says so much about me and helped me define who I really want or was or am, and attain all the things I really wanted. Now is the challenge is to calm those nerves. That's why I do a lot more fishing now. I would have never thought I would get on a boat and go fishing, but the competition of patience and being, trying to catch a fish, trying to be patient. It's not going to happen. You can't make it happen. You just have to be ready when it does happen. Those are all things that I think calms me down a lot more than if I'm playing a sport, if I'm playing golf or if I'm doing anything competitive. Because I think that, that's what I need. That's the therapy that I need to help soothe some of this competitive juices that I have.
Now let's just discuss that momentarily. That's incredible to me because it drives home another principle of the self-soul spirit model. It's about functionality, okay? It's not about right or wrong or good or bad. It was functional for Michael and his whole psyche to be very competitive when he was in the NBA and to bring that to the utmost extent of intensity. What he found as he continued to live his life is, wow, it's hard for this to be functional for me as I live a life outside of the NBA. It's hard for me to function. And so what I'd like to offer is it possible that Michael Jordan, as a soul, repurposed his competitive self to learn competitive patience? That's absolutely brilliant. And it not only does it show his intelligence, it shows a great example of the self-soul spirit model, which is it is what it is. It's what you do with it that matters. It might have worked out just fine for him to bring that intensity during the NBA, but then life happened and things change. And it's about context. And as a context changed, something that used to be functional might not be functional anymore. So that the soul can repurpose the parts of the self in a very meaningful way. And that to me is one of the best examples I've been able to find in our mainstream media and our mainstream celebrities. So let's continue the principles and approaches of the self-soul spirit model. Now, this is also based on what's called Gestalt therapy. Gestalt therapy followed Gestalt psychology. Dr. Strachan's been a Gestalt therapist his whole life. Gestalt's really about being here now, doing the activity, not just talking about it. Talk therapy is you talk about. Gestalt therapy is you be about. You be it. So we have people be the part, talk from the part, be the soul, have them talk to each other out loud. Sometimes we use chair technique. Sometimes they hold them up in different hands. And it's a very powerful way because when we're not talking and not getting our whole body and our whole spirit and soul involved, what happens is we're only using a limited part of the brain. When you do the Gestalt work, when you actually get into the psychodrama of the whole thing where the different parts talk to each other, the effect of it is much more beneficial for the therapeutic process, for the process of self-discovery. So at Living in the Gap, we encourage people to learn how to get into dialogue with themselves. As different as that sounds from our normal day-to-day living, we make that a beautiful part of living life. I do it all the time. My clients do it. It's an amazing way to live, and it helps to resolve things. It helps to have meaningful intentions. Helps to focus on where we want to go on a given day or a given context. Something that my father often brings up is that we can hire certain parts of us for certain jobs. If you got an important business meeting coming up, you can take the entrepreneur and say, you're the one who's going to do this meeting. Or you can take the nurturing, caregiving part and say, hey, I really need you to listen during this meeting. You can be more intentional with your life with this model. Because if you know who you are, and you're aware of how those parts come into your experience, then you have the power of choice. So the parts can also negotiate with each other. Well, as the athlete, I'd like to go for a run. Well, as the lover, I told my fiance that we were going to, go out on a date in 30 minutes. And if I go for a run, there's no way I'm going to be ready. Well, I don't care about that. Just tell her you're not going to be. Well, I really do care about that. What are you talking about? And the soul might eventually jump in and make a choice, or the parts might reach a compromise. Now, sometimes the soul can say, hey, sorry, athlete, you're not getting your way right now. We're doing it this way. The soul is the boss. The buck stops with the soul. So you can negotiate, you can mediate. Now, to close our presentation, great quote. Everything's an inside job. Every conflict that we experience in our own life, the ways that we feel, the ways that we think, the ways that we perceive, it's all an inside job. We have to resolve that within ourselves. And this is the model that we use to do it. A great quote from Joseph Campbell: all the gods, all the heavens, all the worlds are within us. We are complicated and beautiful human beings with many aspects, and also, I believe, souls. And that if we are aware of those facts, we have the potential to break through to new levels of conscious living. So here are some other sources on subpersonalities in psychology. This doesn't nearly scratch the surface of everything that's out there. Right now, I'm doing quite a bit of writing about it in my literature review, and it's just amazing how much has been contributed to this topic in psychology. But Carl Jung, of course, he had various aspects of subpersonalities in his work. James Hillman, they might not use the same exact language, but the idea of multiplicity of the self is in all these thinkers. Gestalt, obviously Self, Soul, Spirit, John Rowan, David Lester, Richard Schwartz, Internal Family Systems. So anyways, those are some references in case you're interested in digging into the literature and reading a little bit for yourself. We also have a tremendous amount of resources we could send your way. If you're interested, you can reach out. Thank you. Grab that chair. Yep.